But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land, in exile in his own land, in exile in his own land.
My heart is
In The Myth of the Negro Past, Herskovits is saying that the significance of his work is to show dynamism, complexity of African culture, and the influences they've had on African American cultures. He's trying to engage in a type of social engineering himself in that book. His argument is that if African Americans know this, that their self-image and their self-respect would be increased.
I will always be grateful to Melville J. Herskovits for the contribution he made to my sense of self. This man said that like every other people on earth, I had a culture, and that it could be traced back to a place called Africa.
Like an now from Africa.
So,
Please
my
hold your
advice to you, if you don't like it here in America, planes leave every hour from Tampa Airport. Go back to Africa. Go back to Africa.
It says right here, you believe in the final solution, which is black repatriation to Africa.
One hour later.
Living in the U.S., all of the seats are taken, all the big brands are there, and here you have an opportunity to create a seat at the table.
It's significant to know where you belong and where you came from.
Because you've also talked about building a road back to Africa. Can you explain that for us?
The final solution, which is black repatriation to Africa.
Brother Washington, the human mitochondrial DNA is quite common among the Mende and Temne people in Sierra Leone.
There's nothing that confident for ethnicity. There's no diagnostic nucleotide. You can say this person is from Europe, this person's from...
Yeah. What I know about Chaminuga, it's a long story of Chaminuga. Chaminuga's body was surviving in Persia. Do you know Persia?
Yes.
That's where most black people came from. Because these southern countries were not having people, they was just forest. The time people began to travel, they came from Persia. They was led by the voice of a bird which was flying that bird was showing them directions to go and the rules of praying to the ancestors, to stop, to spend even 1 week or 1 month or 6 months at the same place. And it was the one which was telling them to move away, to leave some other people.
The world.
muy xam-xam boo xam ne mu ngi wàcc jëm ci wàllu lébu.
And this knowledge came from the Lebus community.
ndax lébu dañu am culture bu mag.
And the Lebus, they have a big culture.
am cosaan bu mag.
And they have a big tradition.
am diine aussi.
And also they have a religion.
kon kenn warul waxtaanee lébu rek nga ñëw rek commencé Sénégal parce que lébu commencé wul Sénégal.
So it doesn't mean, for example, if you're talking about Lebu, you cannot only start in Senegal, because Lebu doesn't come from Senegal.
parce que suñu maam yi dañuy wax ne lébu mu ngi commencé Inde.
Because his ancestors, they said Lebu is came from India.
parce que lébu yi dëkkoon nañu Inde.
Because the Lebu, they used to live in India.
suñu maam yi nee nañu lébu yi def nañu 1000 ans en Inde.
And his ancestors, they said the Lebus, they stay in India for 1,000 years.
alors rabbi yàlla attee ñu jóge Inde nag ci lañ ñëw Égypte.
And when by God, in the future, they leave India, they came to Egypt.
The religion of Buddha of India is well known to have been very ancient. In the most ancient temples scattered throughout Asia, where his worship is yet continued, he is found black as yet. Okay, he is found in the temples and the walls, all right, on the temple walls. He is found black as yet, with a black face, thick lips, and curly hair of the Negro. This is what you're finding Buddha being represented as in these ancient temples. We've shown that, okay? Now remember previous videos we've done on Buddha. Remember his first name, Guatemala. His mom is Maya. Who are the Nagas? Who are the Maya? Where's Buddha really from? Several statues of him may be met with in the Museum of the East India Company. There are 2 exemplars of him brooding on the face of the deep upon a coiled serpent. To what time are we to allot this Negro? You see what he's calling him? He will be proved to have been prior to the god called Krishna. He must have been prior or contemporaneous with the Black Empire, supposed by Sir William Jones to have flourished at Sidon. The religion of this Negro god is found by the ruins of his temples and other circumstances to have been spread over an immense extent of country, even to the remotest parts of Britain, and to have been professed by devotees inconceivably numerous. I very much doubt whether Christianity at this day is professed by more persons than yet profess the religion of Buddha. Of this I shall say more hereafter. When several cities, countries, or rivers at great distances from each other are found to be called by the same name, the coincidence cannot be attributed to accident, but some specific cause for such an effect must be looked for. Thus we have several cities called Heliopolis, or the city of the sun, the reason for which is sufficiently obvious. Thus again, there were several Alexandrias, and on close examination we find 2 Ethiopias alluded to in ancient history, okay? Not just one. So when they're saying the Ethiopian Prester John, one above the higher or southern part of Egypt, and the other somewhere to the east of it. And as it has been thought in Arabia, the people of this latter are called Kushim in the Hebrew text of the Old Testament, and Ethiopians by the text of the Septuagint or the 70. That they cannot have been the Ethiopians of Africa is evident. They're not talking about the Ethiopians of Africa. All right? I ain't saying it. He's letting you know it's evident from a single passage where they are said to have invaded Judah in the days of Asa. Judah or Utah. They invaded Utah under Serah, their king or leader. But the Lord smote the Cushim and Asa and the people that were with him pursued them unto Gerar, and the Ethiopians were overthrown. And they, for example, Asa and his people, smote all the cities round about Gerar, whence it plainly follows that the Cushim here mentioned were such as inhabited the parts adjoining to Gerar, and consequently, but not any part of the African Ethiopia, but Arabia. When it is said that Asa smote the Cushites, or Ethiopians, in number 1,000,000 of soldiers, as far as Gerar, and despoiled all the cities round about, it is absurd to suppose that Gerar in the lot of the tribe of Simeon is meant. The expression all the cities and the millions of men cannot apply to the little town of that tribe. Probably the city in Wilkinson's Atlas in the Tabula Orientalis at the side of the Persian Gulf, which is called Gera, is the city meant by the word Gerard. All right, he said probably, and that Saba was near where it is placed by Dr. Stukely, or somewhere in the peninsula now called Arabia, or he doesn't know, right? He's guessing because this is true old world occasions, might have been over here. And 2 Chronicles 21:16, it is said, and of the Arabians that were near the Ethiopians. This again shows that the Ethiopians were in the peninsula or bordered on it to the eastwards. They could not have lived to the west because the whole land of Egypt lay between them. All right, what Egypt? Ancient Egypt was here. So you see what I'm saying? If they went by land and the Red Sea lay between the two nations westward, the Red Sea, the Gulf of California, you mean? The Mar Vermelho, or the Red Sea, the true Red Sea? So remember, apply all that you're reading with the real places. In Habakkuk 3:7, the words Midian and Cushan are used as synonyms. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction. The curtains of the land of Midian did tremble. It is said in Numbers 12:1, and Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. Kusit. It appears that this Ethiopian woman was the daughter of Jethro, priest of Midian, near Horeb in Arabia. Dr. Wells was justly observed that the Cush spoken of in Scripture is evidently Arabia, from Numbers 12:1, just cited, and that it is also certain from Exodus 2:15-21 that the wife of Moses was Midianitish, a woman, and it is proved that Midian or Madian was in Arabia, from Exodus 3:1, and consequently the Cush here spoken of and called Ethiopia must certainly mean Arabia. He also proves from Ezekiel 29:10 that when God says he will make the land desolate from the tower of Syene to the borders of Ethiopia, Cush, he cannot mean an African Cush, because he evidently means from one boundary of Egypt to the other. And as Syene is the southern boundary between the African Ethiopia and Egypt, it cannot possibly be that he speaks of the former, but of the other end of Egypt, which is Arabia. Yeah, that's if Egypt was over there, right? We already know ancient Egypt was here. So where was Arabia really, huh?
In Africa, the migration of ethnic groups from one place to the other contributed to a large extent in the growth and expansion of ethnic groups that have remained dominant in their geographical entities. One kingdom that was founded as a result of the confluence of several factors was Kabu. It existed between 1537 and 1867. Kabu rose to prominence in the region as a former province of the Mali Empire. It was a Mandinka kingdom of Senegambia centered on modern northeastern Guinea-Bissau, extending into Casamance in Senegal. The famed Imam of Kabu, Bafo de Sane, grew up reading the historical origins of his Mandinka tribe and the close links between the various ethnic groups in the greater Senegambia region.
The history of Kabu. What they got from the elders about Kabu Empire. 3 clans left the Kaaba from Saudi Arabia. The name of the elderly clan called Kamisimbong and Kanuba Simbong and Lawali Simbong. That Lawali Simbong was the first ruler in Manding Kaaba. From there, the first place they built, they called that place Kirikole. That is where they first established. Then they built a village. After that, then they told everybody that they will name it after the Kaaba. That is where they call Manding Kaaba.
Now, for those of you out there that don't know where the fuck you come from, listen to my black ass. Because whoever's out there, you were black, like me. Black. This ain't got nothing to do with race. Well, it does, but you were black at one fucking time in history. So, for those of you that don't know, everybody on this fucking earth came from fucking Africa.
In Persia.
Because his ancestor, they said Lebu is came from India.
3 clans left the Kaaba from Saudi Arabia.
So, for those of you that don't know, everybody on this fucking earth came from fucking Africa.
It is well-known fact that our Hindu soldiers, when they arrived in Egypt in the late war, recognized the gods of their country in the ancient temples, particularly their god Krishna. The striking similarity in the identity of the style of architecture and ornaments of the ancient Egyptian and Hindu temples, Mr. Maurice has proved beyond all doubt. He says travelers who have visited Egypt in periods far more recent than those in which the above-cited authors journeyed thither confirm the truth of their relation, in regard both to the number and extent of the excavations, the beauty of the sculptures, and their similitude to those carved in the caverns of India. The final result, therefore, of this extended investigation is that in the remotest periods there has existed a most intimate connection between the two nations, and that colonies emigrating from Egypt to India, or from India to Egypt, transported their deities into the country in which they respectively took up their abode. This testimony of Reverend Mr. Maurice's is fully confirmed by Sir W. Jones, who says, all right, so before we go into W. Jones, this is exactly what Lepler Jones discovered while he was doing the research in the Maya temples, how he connected everything, the Mayas going into Hindustan or India, and then into Egypt and Africa and all these other places. Now, Mr. Sir W. Jones says, the remains of architecture and culture in India, which I mention here as mere monuments of antiquity, not as specimens of ancient art, seem to prove an early connection between this country and Africa. The pyramids of Egypt, the colossal statues described by Pausanias and others, the Sphinx and the Hermes Canis, which last bears a great resemblance to the Varaha Avatar, or the incarnation of Vishnu in the form of a boar, indicate the style and mythology of the same indefatigable workmen who formed the vast excavations of Kannada, the various temples and images of Buddha, and the idols which are continually dug up at Gaya or in its vicinity. The letters on many of those monuments appear, as I have before intimated, partly of Indian and partly of Abyssinian or Ethiopic origin, and all these indubitable facts may induce no ill-founded opinion that Ethiopia and Hindustan were peopled or colonized by the same extraordinary race. Listen, this is what I was saying. Who are these extraordinary people? In confirmation of which it may be added that the mountaineers of Bengal and Bahar can hardly be distinguished in some of their features, particularly their lips and noses, from the modern Abyssinians, whom the Arabs call the children of Kush, and the ancient Hindus, according to Strabo, differed in nothing from the Africans, but in the straightness and smoothness of their hair, while that of the others was crisp or woolly, a difference proceeding chiefly, if not entirely, from the respective humidity or dryness of their atmospheres. Hence the people who received the first light of the rising sun, according to the limited knowledge of the ancients, are said by Apuleius to be the Ari and Ethiopians, by which he clearly meant certain nations of India, where we frequently see figures of Buddha with curled hair, apparently designed for a representation of it in its natural state. Okay? Buddha. Again, Sir W. Jones says, Mr. Bruce and Mr. Bryant have proved that the Greeks gave the appellations of Indians to the nations of Africa and to the people among whom we now live. I shall account for this in the following work. Monsignor de Guines maintains that the inhabitants of Egypt in very old times had unquestionably a common origin with the old natives of India, as is fully proved by their ancient monuments and the affinity of their languages and institutions, both political and religious. Many circumstances confirming the above, particularly with respect to the language, will be pointed out hereafter. It is curious to observe the ingenuity exercised by Sir W. Jones to get over obstacles which oppose themselves to his theological creed, which he has previously determined nothing shall persuade him to disbelieve. He says, we are told that the Phoenicians, like the Hindus, adored the sun and asserted water to be the first of created things. Nor can we doubt that Syria, Samaria, and Phoenice, or the long strip of land on the shore of the Mediterranean, were anciently peopled by a branch of the Indian stock, but were afterwards inhabited by that race which for the present we call Arabian. Here we see he admits that the ancient Phoenicians were Hindus. All right, the ancient Phoenicians. He then goes on to observe that in all three, the oldest religion was the Assyrian, as it is called by Selden, and the Samaritan letters appear to have been the same at first with those of Phoenice. Now, with respect to which was the oldest religion, as their religions were all, at the bottom, precisely the same, the worship of the sun, there is a strong probability that the earliest occupiers of the land, the Hindus, were the founders of the solar worship, as the contrary. When the various circumstances and testimonies which have been detailed are taken into consideration, there can be scarcely any doubt left on the mind of the reader that by the word Ethiopia, two different countries have been meant, all right? Different locations. That's one of the most important things of today's reading, right? Ethiopian wasn't just one place or associated to the Ethiopia of today in Africa, okay? This seems to be perfectly clear. I hope that was clear to you. And it is probable that by an Ethiopian, a Negro, correctly speaking, they just mean somebody, a melanated person, so-called Negro, so-called black person, may have been meant, okay? A Negro may have been meant when they're talking about Ethiopian, not merely a black person. And it seems probable that the following may have been the real fact, that a race either of Negroes or blacks, but probably of the former, came from India to the west, occupying or conquering and forming a kingdom on the two banks of the Euphrates, the western Ethiopia alluded to in Numbers, chapter 12. Of course, this author is leaving, America out of all this. So he's just putting it where he thinks it is. That they advanced forward, occupying Syria, Phoenicia, Arabia, and Egypt. That they, or some tribe of them, were the shepherd kings of Egypt. That after a time, the natives of Egypt rose against them and expelled part of them into Abyssinia or Ethiopia, another part of them into Idumea or Syria or Arabia, and another part into the African deserts of Libya, where they were called Lubim. The time at which these people came to the west was certainly long previous to the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt, but how long previous to that event must remain doubtful. No system of chronology can be admitted as evidence. Every known system is attended with too many difficulties. Perhaps chronology may be allowed to instruct us in relation to facts as to which preceded or followed, but certainly nothing more. No chronological date can be depended on previous to the capture of Babylon by Cyrus. Whether we can depend upon it quite so far back seems to admit of doubt. Part of the ancient monuments of Egypt may have been executed by these people. The Menoniums found in Persia and in Egypt leave little room to doubt this. In favor of this hypothesis, all ancient sacred and profane historical accounts agree, and poetical works of imagination cannot be admitted to compete as evidence with the works of serious historians like Herodotus. This hypothesis likewise reconciles all the accounts which at first appeared discordant, but which no other will do. It is also confirmed by considerable quantity of circumstantial evidence. It is therefore presumed by the writer, he may safely assume in his forthcoming discussions, that there were two Ethiopias, one to the east of the Red Sea, all right, right there in the Gulf of California, and the other to the west of it, right on the other side of it. And that a very great nation of blacks from India did rule over almost all Asia in a very remote era. All right, we got future videos on all this. We're going to prove it. In fact, beyond the reach of history or any of our records. And that's what I'm trying to tell you to dodge the hijack when you're, stereotyping Asians, because the ancient Asians, many look like you. In fact, many of these are your ancestors that they're talking about. In fact, beyond the reach of history or any of our records. This and what has been observed respecting judicial astrology will be retained in recollection by my reader. They will both be found of great importance in our future inquiries. In my essay on the Celtic Druids, I have shown that a great nation called Celtai, of whom the Druids were the priests, spread themselves almost over the whole earth, and are to be traced in their root gigantic monuments from India to the extremity of Britain. All right, this is what I was saying earlier, the connection with the British Isles and Hindustan. Who these can have been but the early individuals of the black nation? Who are these? Even the Celtic Druids, huh? Of whom we have been treating, I know not. And in this opinion, I am not singular. The learned Maurice says, Kuthites, example Celts, built the great temple in India and Britain, and excavated the caves of the former. And the learned mathematician Reuben Burrow has no hesitation in pronouncing Stonehenge to be temple of the black, curly-headed Buddha. All right? I shall leave the further consideration of this black nation for the present. I shall not detain my reader with any of the numerous systems of the Hindus, the Persians, the Chaldeans, Egyptians, or other nations, except in those particular instances which immediately relate to the object of this work, in the course of which I shall often have occasion to recur to what I have here said, and shall also have opportunities of supporting it by additional evidence. And we reached the end of Book 1, Chapter 4 of this volume. Hope you guys enjoyed the reading. A lot of babies to pull out. Just want
Tribes of Kush settled first in South America on the basin of the Gihon River, which at one point was the only thing separating South America from Africa at the time. The basin of the Gihon River had streams which included the Amazon River and the Congo River, which at one point were both connected. They set up civilization on both sides of the Gihon River. This is how South American Indians brought civilization to Africa. These so-called Indians were the Kushites. There's a lot of archaeological evidence supporting African civilization actually beginning in South America that mainstream archaeologists choose to hide or deliberately ignore. An African author, Katanga Ebongo, wrote a book entitled Civilization and the Ancient Egyptians. In the book, he stated that South American Indians brought civilization to Africa. This does make sense because civilization in South America can be traced back 11,500 years, while early African civilization date back to 7,500 years. Kush was built on both sides of the Gihon River, and during the days of Peleg, when the continent split, the two parts of Kush went with it. A Kushite empire in America and a Kushite empire in Africa. Both kingdoms flourished and spread. Africa's Kush did not start in modern Ethiopia as previously believed. It actually began in the west and grew large, rich, and popular in the east along the White and Blue Nile. A key aspect of Kush was a material called topaz, a highly valuable blue stone found mainly in South America and West Africa. In the book of Job, chapter 28 and 19, it clearly states that Ethiopia, aka Kush, was known for its highly valuable topaz. However, topaz can mainly be found in South America and West Africa, which were at one point connected. Topaz cannot be found in modern-day Ethiopia. Therefore, modern-day Ethiopia cannot be the original biblical Ethiopia or the original biblical Kush. In Hebrew, Gaihan means to burst forth, okay? Now, when Africa and South America separated, the Gaihan River eventually formed the South Atlantic Ocean, which is the most powerful body of water on the planet. Most of the slaves who died in the transatlantic slave trade died because of the choppy waters. Ships were drowned. This is the reason, because the water burst forth in this region. Now, you can look on both sides of the Gaihan and see names with similar etymology. Like you can find Guyana north of Brazil. You can find Guinea in Africa. You can find Ghana in Africa, because it's all connected to the Gaihan. Now, another thing about the Gaihan is every river has a basin, and every basin has streams, and every river system has other rivers attached. Now, in South America, you would have the Amazon, and it's directly connected to the Congo River, and they flow perfectly. Now, according to mainstream science, you will actually find out that the Amazon River at one point did flow from east to west instead of west to east like it does today. When you look at the Pison River, in Genesis 2 it tells us that the Pison compassed the entire land of Havilah, which is the land of gold. Now, the highest concentration of gold on earth can be found in the western coast of the Americas, from Alaska all the way down to Peru, in Mexico and California as well. All of that is a high concentration of gold. Okay, so that makes sense as well. Pison in Hebrew is talking about a large body of water. And once Lumaria separated from the Americas and sank, the Pacific became the world's largest body of water. So once they crossed the Hideko, they set up civilization around here, Akkad and Babel. Now you see Akkad today, Akkadia. Ancient Algonquian Indians have confirmed that this land has always been called Akkadia. And Babel, you can see that the stone structures in this land predate any North American tribe. So scientists are still wondering who built those cities. And I personally believe that this is actually the cities of Babylon. When the languages were confounded, every nation split up and went their own ways. And Kush, for example, went south into Mexico and into South America and built empire on both sides of the Gaihan. And when they split, Kush Empire was on this side of the river and Kush Empire was on this side of the river. You have Kush in South America and Kush in Africa. You have two Kushite empires at the same time. Job chapter 28 tells us that the land of Kush is known for its beautiful topaz stones, which are mainly found in Brazil and Nigeria. Not modern Ethiopia, not modern Kush, but in this region. And this region has to be the actual Kush.
For the scattered tribes of the melanated Aboriginal indigenous peoples. Okay, we used to be one land mass. It was called Pangea, and over thousands of years it has separated.
Because you can see how America and Africa fit together like a puzzle. I even went so far as one day to cut out this edge on the map and cut out this edge of the map and bring the two together. And they fit together perfectly, except for there's a space right in the middle where Atlantis would have been at. And their scientists will tell you that, oh, them continents, they separated millions and millions and millions of years ago. There was no humans around at that time. We're talking about these things taking place as recently, the last of these things taking place as recently as 1500.
Here we go, Job chapter 28 verse 19. The pit dove, Kush, cannot appropriate it. We're talking about wisdom. Now, Pitda is the Hebrew word for topaz, and Kush is the Hebrew word for Ethiopia. Let's go. What is Kalinin topaz? Hailing from Nigeria, West Africa, right? And then it says right here, the most historically significant gemstone deposits on Earth be in east of Brazil. Understand that East Brazil and West Africa.
A lot of maroon villages along, for example, the Suriname River.
real Kovanti people of the river. The Kovanti rule.
Yeah, Oscar boy. Okay.
Ago.
Monsieur.
Tumo bama.
Kama daddy. Si Congo.
Mama.
Beshani. Onyolele. Puto nani ota. La gan. C'est gan. Gan. Bata. Tobete. Sokonidi. Sakadado.
Ah, yes, I've come back.
Satoto.
I'm Kosa.
Bidi Mumbai.
From Mumbai.
Tatarele Twanu.
Kataro Sekawa.
Sakaladero Didida.
Not only do many South American Indians speak Ghanaian language, but guess what? According to Christopher Columbus's observation, when he came to America, he reported Africans coming to America as well, having interactions with each other. And these interactions most likely have been happening forever. I be telling people, South America and Africa is one landmass. Ethiopia, Kush, only to be separated by the South Atlantic Ocean. And not only that, let us not forget about Abu Bakr II. Abu Bakr II was a Malian king of the Mali Empire. They went to the Americas 200 years before Columbus, and that has not even been the first time Africans went to the Americas. They have been doing that. And not only did Abu Bakr II go to the Americas, but he went to present-day Brazil, most likely to meet their cousins who are just sitting on the other side of the waters. Now, using our Latin 16th century Gerardus Mercator map, we will then begin to look into the original names of these territories. Let's first look at Oceanus Atlanticus. This does not mean Atlantic Ocean. This means the Ocean of Atlantis. We know this because Atlantis was at one point right here. Atlantis was a huge island with empires that stretched all the way through West Africa and all the way through the northern part of South America. Pyramids all in the Atlantic Ocean. But anyway, let's talk about this. Oceanus Ethiopicus. What do you think that means? Oceanus Ethiopicus. That means the Ocean of Ethiopia. Ocean of Ethiopia. Now, if Ethiopia is freaking right here, because this is what everybody thinks, Ethiopia is right here, why the heck would this be called the Ocean of Ethiopia? Now you have to think, shouldn't this be called the Ocean of Ethiopia or the Sea of Ethiopia or something, because this is closer to Ethiopia than this is? I mean, Persia was supposed to be right here. They named this the Persian Gulf or the Sea of Persia, right? But here's the thing. Way before the 1500s, way before imperialism and colonialism, way before white people started to divide and conquer Aboriginal territories, Africa was only divided in 3 to 4 main parts. The northern region of Africa was called Libya, and you can still see it here. Libya, all of this is Libya. You see Nubia right here, you see that's Nubia. And all of this in the central region was called Ethiopia. Let's
They came of age in the heady civil rights struggle of the 1960s amid a growing sense of Pan-African nationalism. Their children thought they were crazy.
They were angry for a long time. That hurt. That really, really hurt. But the opportunity to return to the land of one's ancestors, to be able to make that real connection with who it is that you are, your true identity, the sacrifice of family was worth it. Because 16 years later, our family are beginning to come.
Up to 5,000 blacks are believed to have moved to Ghana from North America, the Caribbean, Brazil and Europe. For many, it's been a bittersweet homecoming.
Yes, this is home. This is our new home. We've been here approximately 5 weeks now. Of course, we've been in Ghana going on 4 months.
And this is where we plan to have our entertainment room, which is...
Dr. Adwoa Asatiwa left a university professorship to move to Cape Coast with her husband, Kwaku.
We decided to relocate.
As expected, they found they can live in relative luxury on their savings.
So if you're going to retire, this is a better option than going to Florida? Or...
Oh, absolutely. Well, Florida, if you go to Florida, you have to start with $1 million up front, and that's not going to buy you too much in Florida.
But they've had to come to terms with a disturbing discovery. The Africans they see as brothers and sisters see them as strangers.
We wanted to feel like we had come home. However, we later found that we weren't that welcome by the native population. But we weren't welcome is because they don't know us, and we don't know them.
It takes just a short visit to the local market to see the gulf of 500 years of separation.
I don't want smoke, I want fresh.
Most locals don't even regard them as fellow blacks.
You have Gruba, I want Gruba.
They call them a Bruni, meaning whites.
How much you gonna charge me? And don't charge me old Bruni prices. Beanie. If you charge me old Bruni, I don't buy. I like you, so I'm gonna buy. I'll pay 1,000, but I know you overcharge me.
So is she a Bruni? She's a Bruni, is she?
Yeah. So I'm not old Bruni. I'm Bibini. Okay. Okay. Yo, Ashanti. It is not a very pleasing way to be identified. You know, we don't want to be called a Bruni because we certainly weren't treated like a Bruni in the U.S. By any stretch of the imagination. We were treated as African people. So that is a challenge.
She's also found that people have little sympathy for them as descendants of slaves.
They don't know the history. They don't know who we are. They don't know that we are Abebu. They don't know that we are descendants of the Africans that were taken here through enslavement into the various Americas. They don't understand that for the most part. But our task and our challenge is to bring this information back to our brothers and sisters here.
Dr. Adwoa wants to learn from Ghanaians, but also teach them how to do things properly, beginning with basic hygiene.
Now you notice too that they have open sewers.
Yeah.
Now that is definitely a health hazard. Yeah. And many times you will find that people will be eating and selling food and right on the...
Now they walk around saying Cherokee, Choctaw, Shinnecock, Cheyenne, and we walk around saying African, African, African. Now they walk around saying Cherokee, Choctaw, Shinnecock, Cheyenne.
When you ask yourself questions on the slave trade, your indwelling intelligence will kick out the correct answers. If the people were packed in like sardines, how did they eat and drink? What did they eat and drink? What about body waste? You mean to tell me that these people just pissed and shit on each other for months? And remember, shit is toxic. If the people were packed in like sardines, how did they eat and drink? What did they eat and drink? What about body waste? You mean to tell me that these people just pissed and shit on each other for months? And remember, shit is toxic.
As you see all the movies, 12 Years a Slave, it's a constant reminder that, hey, African Americans, this is your story in America. When I was in Nigeria, I did not know of the African American story until I got to America and found out. That's true. Right? I did not know anything about slavery.
You said American, and that's a new word for a lot of people. Could you explain what American is?
A Latin approach, it'll be A-M-E space R-I-C-A-N. And as soon as I did that, I say, oh, Rican. And I knew that Rican meant rich place, and Rica meant rich place, and Rican meant rich, wealthy people. That's why you have the names like Puerto Rico or Costa Rico. Puerto Rico means rich port, Costa Rica means rich coast, etc., etc. So it's rich coast and rich people. So I said, well, then America, what would America mean? And then in Spanish, AME is the past tense for the word love. Love, L-O-V-E-D, that's past tense. So I said, well, that's even great. So then America would mean love, rich people. So I said, that's much better because that describes the nature of us. So it's not just a label, it's also a description. And so then one day I forgot what the word AME meant, and I was looking it up. And so I pulled up the French dictionary as opposed to the Spanish dictionary for the word AME. And then as soon as I saw it, I remembered that AME in French means soul. And then that's when the knowing came right to me right then, because oh wow. So if I use the Spanish for AME, the French for AME, and the Spanish for French, it literally means, the literal translation is really soul rich people or soul rich place. And so that's when I started using the term America for the Americas, because it wasn't just a label, it was also a description, because I always talk about our people being the soul people of the earth. You can travel all over the earth, no matter where, but the original copper-colored people that are found in the Americas, we have more soul energy, soul power than any other group I've ever seen on the earth or contact. That's our strength, that's our purpose, that's our nature, that's the gift, that's what we have flowing in overabundance. We're the soul people. Well, I mean, everybody knows. Well, have you ever heard of soul music and soul food? Have you ever heard of soul brother and soul sister?